The scene at Dulles International Airport was both surreal and deeply symbolic. 60 Afrikaners, men, women, and children stepped off a U.S. government-chartered plane. They were greeted not with the usual chaos of international arrivals but with an eerie calm. Their faces, etched with a mixture of anxiety and relief, told a story of flight, of fear, and of a journey into the unknown. These were the newest arrivals in America's long history of welcoming refugees, but their arrival was shrouded in controversy. Unlike those fleeing war or famine, these refugees claimed to be escaping something more insidious: racial persecution in their homeland of South Africa. The date was May 12, 2025, and this was no ordinary refugee crisis. It was a crisis born of political calculation, historical grievance, and a deeply divided world. As the Afrikaners made their way through the airport, their future uncertain, one thing was clear: their arrival on American soil would have far-reaching consequences. The Trump administration wasted no time in justifying its decision to grant refuge to the Afrikaners. In a statement that sent shockwaves through the international community, the White House declared that these were victims of racial discrimination and race-based persecution. Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's hardline immigration policies, emerged as the public face of the resettlement program. With his characteristic bluntness, Miller argued that offering sanctuary to the Afrikaners was entirely consistent with the original intent of America's refugee program. The administration pointed to South Africa's controversial Expropriation Act, which allows for the seizure of land without compensation, as evidence of the Afrikaners' plight. They painted a picture of a white minority under siege, their farms and livelihoods threatened by a government they claimed was intent on driving them from their ancestral lands. President Trump himself weighed in, signing an executive order that not only paused aid to South Africa, but also offered a fast track to citizenship for Afrikaner farmers seeking refuge in the United States. The response from Pretoria was swift and furious. South Africa's government categorically denied the allegations of racial discrimination and persecution, accusing the Trump administration of playing politics with a complex and sensitive issue. They pointed to police statistics that showed no evidence of targeted violence against farmers of any particular race. The Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation issued a strongly worded statement, asserting that the situation in South Africa did not meet the internationally recognized threshold for refugee status. They argued that the U.S. move was not about protecting human rights, but about advancing a politically motivated agenda. South Africa's leaders saw the resettlement program as a cynical attempt to undermine their country's sovereignty and to sow discord within its borders. They vowed to fight the U.S. decision on the international stage, framing it as a dangerous precedent that threatened to unravel the very fabric of international law. At the heart of the controversy lay the Expropriation Act, a piece of legislation that had become a lightning rod for racial tensions in South Africa. The act, passed by the South African Parliament in 2017, empowered the government to expropriate land without compensation under certain circumstances. While the act itself made no mention of race, it was widely seen as an attempt to redress the legacy of apartheid, which had systematically dispossessed black South Africans of their land. The Trump administration and its supporters seized on the act as proof that white South Africans were being unfairly targeted. They argued that it violated property rights and amounted to a form of state-sanctioned theft. South Africa, however, insisted that the act was necessary to correct historical injustices, and that it would be implemented in a fair and transparent manner. They argued that land reform was essential for achieving racial equality and economic justice in a country still grappling with the deep scars of its past. Section 5. A House divided political battle lines drawn in Washington. The arrival of the Afrikaner refugees did not unite America, but rather exposed the deep political fissures that ran through the nation. While the Trump administration and its allies in the Republican Party defended the resettlement program as a moral imperative, many Democrats were outraged. They accused the Trump administration of hypocrisy, pointing to the administration's abysmal record on refugee resettlement and its draconian immigration policies. Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, emerged as a vocal critic of the program, calling it a sick global apartheid policy and accusing the administration of pandering to white nationalists. Others questioned the speed with which the Afrikaners were granted refugee status. contrasting it with the long and arduous process faced by refugees from other parts of the world. The controversy over the Afrikaners laid bare the deep ideological divides over race, immigration, and America's role in the world. Section 6. The Musk Factor, a voice from the past fuels the fire. Adding fuel to the already raging fire was Elon Musk, the South African-born tech mogul who had become a close advisor to President Trump. Musk, who had long been critical of the South African government, lent his considerable voice to the cause of the Afrikaners. In a series of tweets that went viral, Musk accused the South African government of perpetrating a genocide against white farmers, a claim that was widely condemned as irresponsible and inflammatory. Musk's intervention, while welcomed by the Trump administration and its supporters, further inflamed tensions between the United States and South Africa. It also raised uncomfortable questions about the role of powerful individuals in shaping public discourse and influencing government policy. Musk's pronouncements, amplified by his massive online following, served to further polarize an already deeply divided debate. Section 7. Diplomatic shockwaves, U.S.-South Africa, relations in the balance. The decision to grant refuge to the Afrikaners sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community, casting a long shadow over U.S.-South Africa relations. South Africa's Deputy Minister Alvin Botes summoned U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau to express his government's grave concern over the resettlement program. Botes accused the United States of interfering in South Africa's internal affairs and of undermining its sovereignty. He warned that the move would have serious implications for bilateral relations. The U.S. State Department, for its part, offered no clear explanation as to how the Afrikaners met the legal definition of refugees under international law. Instead, they issued vague statements about the United States' commitment to human rights and its tradition of welcoming those fleeing persecution. The lack of transparency and the apparent double standard fueled accusations that the Trump administration was more interested in scoring political points than in upholding international law or promoting human rights. Section 8. A question of priorities. The refugee program under scrutiny. The arrival of the Afrikaners also put a spotlight on the Trump administration's controversial record on refugees. Critics were quick to point out that the administration had spent the past 4 years dismantling the U.S. refugee resettlement program, slashing admissions to historic lows, and erecting bureaucratic hurdles that made it nearly impossible for those fleeing violence and persecution to find safety in the United States. The Trump administration's decision to prioritize the resettlement of a small group of white South Africans, while turning its back on refugees from war-torn countries like Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, was met with accusations of racism and hypocrisy. Human rights groups accused the administration of using the refugee program as a political tool, exploiting the plight of vulnerable populations to advance a xenophobic agenda. Section 9. Looking ahead, a legacy of discord and uncertainty. The arrival of the Afrikaners on American soil marked the beginning of a new chapter in the complex and often fraught relationship between the United States and South Africa. It also raised profound questions about the meaning of refuge in the 21st century, a time of rising nationalism, increasing inequality, and a global refugee crisis of unprecedented scale. As the Afrikaners began their new lives in America, their future, like the future of U.S.-South Africa relations, remained uncertain. The controversy surrounding their arrival had exposed deep divisions within both countries and had the potential to poison relations for years to come. Only time would tell whether this controversial act of refuge would ultimately serve as a bridge or a barrier between two nations grappling with their shared history and uncertain futures.